Welcome back to the second tutorial on Computer Numerical Control, where we will go over an intermediate code. In this tutorial, we will continue on the basic knowledge gained from the first tutorial, as well as expand on that. As you will remember, Computer Numerical Control, or CNC, is a coding language used mostly in manufacturing, in which the program commands, stored on a computer, precisely control the machine automatically. Most CNC coding is used mainly for milling, but also includes turning and plasma cutting to make higher quality parts faster and cheaper. For this tutorial, you will need the PDF attached here, a piece of engineering paper, and a pencil. Before watching this series of CNC tutorials, it would be to your benefit to review the flashcards on Study Blue to learn what each line of code means. Also, if you have not watched the easy tutorial in this series, you may want to do so now, because we will not be covering all the basic steps that were covered in the first tutorial. This intermediate tutorial on CNC coding will incorporate different movements than the beginning tutorial. We will practice going from counterclockwise to clockwise arc movements. We will also practice picking up the cutting tool. This program will use relative mode, meaning for every new point, those measurements will be based off the previous point stated. Step 1. Looking at the first line of code, N0000, we will notice that G91 is used, meaning we will be in relative mode. The G01 used will tell the machine to go to its starting point, x0, y0, in a regular linear speed. Step 2. Then continuing on to the second code, N0005, we will tell the machine to lower the tool to start making cuts with a depth of 0.5 because it says go down negative 0.5 in the Z direction. Step 3. For the third line of code, we will look at N0010. So looking at our last point of 00, we will add the new X and Y coordinates to the old point because we are in relative mode. So our position of the cutter will now be 0 on the x-axis and 2.5 on the y. Step 4. For the fourth line of code, N0020, the new x position tells us to move 3.75 units to the right and 0 units in the y direction. This process of adding the new positions to the previous point continues throughout the code. Step 5. Now looking at the fifth line of code, N0030, we have to take into consideration where our last point was, so we can add 0 to the x-coordinate and 12.5 to the y. Our last point we left off at was x at 3.75 and y at 2.5. Adding the new coordinates to the fifth line of code tells us we will now be at x equals 3.75 and y equals 15. For the rest of the I in ISU, steps 6 through 14, we will have you try and accomplish this on your own. If you get lost, it will be worked through on the screen, but not in the talk-through. Remember, we are in relative mode, so always add the new points listed in the line of code to the old point you left off at. You are constantly adding the x and y points. Step 15. Now that we have finished the I, we need to incorporate a pickup with the tool to start the S. N0130 tells you we will need to move the tool bit up +1 in the Z direction so it doesn't drag the tool across the part between the I and the S. Step 16. This line is similar to the ones we have done in the past, N0140, so we will use rapid traverse movement based on the G00. Step 17. The 17th line of code, N0150 will tell us where the tool will move to from the last point stated on the eye. So, we will go from the origin to x being 12.5 and y being 5. Step 18. Now that we have designated our new point we are moving to start the S, we will need to move the tool bit back down to make cuts. So, from the line N0160, we want to change to G01 because prior, we told it to rapidly move to the new point, but now we want it to slow down. Now we will move the tool bit down -1 in the Z-axis to begin our cuts. Step 19. To begin the bottom arc of the S, we will need to use the line N0170. You will notice we changed to a G03 code because we are making a counterclockwise arc, not a linear movement anymore. The end point of the arc is going to be found by adding on x5, y5 to the previous point. So we will now be at 17.5 on the x-axis and 10 on the y-axis. Remember, from our first tutorial, we have to designate the center point of the arc so it knows how big to make it. Based on the I5J0 part of the code, we can tell the center point of our arc is at x 17.5 and y is at 5 because, again, we are in relative mode and our last point was at x equals 12.5 and y at 5. So add the I and j values to your previous point. Step 20. From here we will go into the top curve of the S by switching from a counterclockwise arc to a G02 or clockwise arc. N0180 tells us that the endpoint will be moved 2.5 units in the x and y directions. Our center point for this movement will be placed 0 units in the x and 2.5 units up in the y. Step 21. From the steps described above, you should now be able to finish out the remaining portion of the S and be able to move your tool over to the U. Once the code hits line N0370, the program will be complete. This wraps up the second video in our 3-video series, the Intermediate Design. To continue practicing computer numerical control, make sure to watch the next video, a complex design. The next tutorial will be less guided so you can practice your skills on your own. Thanks for watching, and we hope this tutorial helped to challenge you with a longer design of CNC coding.